Okay. Is this during the morning time or afternoon time, or it's still no? Okay, so good afternoon would be okay then. I mean, just making sure so I won't say good morning and then it was like what? Okay. 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 Perfect. Thank you. Oh, I'm gonna share my screen so we could start the. Can you just confirm that you can see my screen? Okay. Perfect. Then. Thank you. Okay. So good afternoon. Um, as you know, my name is Elvis Fuentes, and today I have the honor of presenting my topic. The topic is to speak or not to speak, to play or not to play. That's the dilemma. I am currently an ESOL and world language Spanish teacher in DC public schools. There's my email if you guys have any other further questions later on. So we're gonna begin with the following: how to be a good listener. This is something very important that a lot of us know, but sometimes we tend to forget about. And one of the first recommendations that I have is, you have to be an active listener. What this means is you have to be actually listening, like paying attention to what the other person is telling you. There's this other acronym. I was doing some research more about this and found this acronym very interesting. It says SBLR, which is stop, breathe, listen, and then respond. So I have a video here, a short video I'm going to share with you so you can watch and learn a little bit more about the SBLR.
So let's talk about listening.
That's easy.
We all think we're good listeners, but have you ever done this? Or this? Or this?
Oh dear, I have.
Well, sadly, we all have.
Oh well, if everyone does it, then it can't be that big a deal.
Actually, it is. When we don't listen, we're saying, yeah, what you're saying isn't important.
Oh dear. So, what should I do?
Well, be present and focus when your friend is talking. We call this active listening.
That sounds hard.
Well, the more you do it, the better you become. A great way to practice active listening is to stop.
Like at a stop street.
Not that kind of stop. It stands for stop, breathe, listen, respond. So first you stop what you're doing. And yes, you guessed it. Then you breathe. Now you're ready to listen and
What if I
without interrupting. And we don't just listen with our ears. We listen with our whole body.
My body talks?
You betcha. Look at Jim over here. What do you think his body is communicating to his friend?
He's bored for sure. So how can I not be like Jim?
Well, make sure your eyes are looking straight at the person talking. Your feet are still on the floor. Your mouth is quiet. No talking or making weird sounds.
What's next?
Now you're ready to respond in a kind and patient way. Find out more about the situation, but don't try to solve everything.
But if I can't solve the problem, what can I say?
So say something to encourage them, like, tell me more, or how did that make you feel, or even, what can I do to help?
So, to be an active listener, I need to stop, breathe, listen, and only then respond?
A+.
Crushed it!
All right. So that was pretty much it. Those are the acronyms, which I find really interesting. We should put into practice. And something that, I have taught my students also, because normally we are always trying to talk about things. We love sharing, but sometimes we forget to listen and let other people share their own stories about what they're going through. So we also have, in order to be a good listener, we also have be fully present. Uh, you know, 2 ears, one mouth. Sometimes we have many mouths and no ears, right? So that's something we have to keep in mind, be very careful about. Also, to have an open body language. This is something that before I was not aware of very much when I was in the university. And I noticed that a lot of the times when I was trying to explain something in front of my teachers or my classmates, some of them were with their hands crossed like this, and I was like, I felt like I didn't want to continue sharing my information, but I wasn't aware why it was, and it's because of body language. So when you're like this, it's more like, yeah, not that quite interesting in what you're saying. But if you put your hands like this, you're actually looking into the person's eye when you're talking. It shows that you're actually paying attention and you want to learn more about what they would like to share. So this information is in a book and it's actually free to download. It's called Listening Skills, 30 Thoughts for the Day. Caleb Storkey is the author, and it came out last year. So if you guys want to check into that later on. So this is the first game. Um, One of the activities I love doing games activities where I keep my students busy moving around. Um, so this activity first consists that one of the partners is going to listen for a minute while the other partner is actually speaking for a minute. You cannot say anything. If you're listening, you have to be quiet, just using the previous strategies that I mentioned to pay attention to what they're saying. And it's just to see, get the feeling of what it is. So, and an example would be, like name, age, where you're from, what you do, why you do what you do. And you can use this activity for any other things when you're doing a class. It could be based on what you're actually teaching. It could be like a review from the previous class, just to see if they actually remember specific points that you want to mention. The idea here is to practice the fact of being a good listener and also, knowing what to share specific information in a minute. So that's one of the first activities you guys can do. So before moving on into the games and talking about the fun stuff, right? There's always a reason why we do these things. I used to be my first years of teaching. I remember that I would do activities because I felt good and I felt like my students were actually practicing and having fun at the same time what they were doing. However, I started, when I started teaching more and more and more, I started researching and wondering why I do what I do without knowing what I'm actually doing. So I came across to this theory called communicative learning teaching. Let me put this smaller. It is communicative learning teaching, CLT. And one of the main things that we talk about here is, being able to communicate based on what Larson Freeman said in her book in 2011. Being able to communicate is one of the most important things about this theory. Being linguistic, having linguistic competence, communicative competence. These two things are very important to keep into mind with this theory. This also helps students to know when and how to say what to whom. It all depends on the situation, and based on the situation, they're going to know how to respond and communicate with the other person. And also, there's no single agreed upon version of CLT. This means that it's not a specific way of doing it. There could be a little bit of variations. It all depends on how you apply it to the students. Remember that each student has their own learning style. So the importance of the CLT, the principles. We have authentic language is used in real context. It should be introduced to students. In order to do this, I personally do the connect before direct method. I learned this in Costa Rica in a scholarship a few years back. I learned that when you first focus on connecting with your students, understanding who they are, where they're coming from, making them feel comfortable enough, that's going to give them the opportunity to actually feel more like prepared to pay attention to what you're saying and willing to learn. Also, the teacher responsibility. We have the responsibility of establishing different situations to promote the communication among students while they're practicing with each other. One way is giving tasks. What I like to do is connecting the first one with the second one is giving them meaningful, authentic information that they can use according to their settings, the country, your culture, and try to give them as many opportunities as I can so they can practice within the classroom. That way, they know what to do for each vocabulary or information that is given to them in class. The third principle would be communicative interaction, encourages cooperative relationships among students. This gives students an opportunity to work on negotiating meaning. Now, this is pretty interesting because even though, like, I remember once I had, when I was studying my master's, uh, some of my classmates were from we had people from Costa Rica, we had people from Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, everywhere. And even though we spoke the same language, we ended up negotiating meaning, as they say. And I find it interesting because there was this person, she said, I normally say charamusca. And then she's like, what is charamusca? And then I explained to her what it was for me. And she's like, oh, that's topollillo. I'm like, topollillo. But for me, topollillo it's an old show. I don't remember what decade it's, the 80s or 70s, but it's a little mouse that is dancing and singing for kids. That's for me, that was topollillo. But then she's like, no, topollillo is charamusca. I'm like, oh, okay. So that's how we start learning about culture and other countries and how they call, the same things but different names. So that's very fascinating, and that's how they start negotiating and learning more about each other, especially from the same language. The fourth principle that we have is students should be given opportunities to work on language as it is used in authentic communication. So in conclusion, with these four principles, very important principles, would be if you start combining authentic, meaningful language for the students, instead of talking, if you have students, for example, from Central America, and you start talking about Paris or England or UK, whatever, and you adapt it in a different way for them, they might not be too engaged in information because you're talking about another place. They might be interested in the place, but it's not the same connection. And since we're trying to connect with them, the vocabulary, what I would do is do some research and find some places that they already know from where they live. So if we're talking about Guatemala, we'll start talking about Petén, or if we're talking about El Salvador, let's start talking about San Miguel, San Salvador. Honduras, I'll be talking about Tegucigalpa, San Pedro Sula, places that they can connect and be like, oh, I know that place. Oh, that's actually my place. That's my country. So they can feel like, I want to participate in this class. So they will feel more engaged because of that. So authentic language plus many opportunities as a teacher that you give them to participate in the class is going to create an authentic communication for the students. We also have an influence of the SEAL2 students. Now, the influence for this are different techniques. As I was mentioning before, we have authentic materials. These help students to transfer what they have learned in class into the outside world. And we also have language games. Students find them enjoyable when properly designed. Now, as I was mentioning, it all depends the type of games that you use. You have to be very careful because it's not only like, okay, let's play Hangman. I got 10 extra minutes. Let's do that right now. It's not about that. It's more about, okay, what kind of game can I use to explain my target language right now, the specific objective that I have in my class. What can I do to make it fun, but at the same time make them understand, learn, and giving them a great time to have in class. So that's the whole idea, that you have to be very careful when preparing your classes for that. So we have a theory on communicative games. We have importance of games in the classroom. Now, we see these pictures, right? These kids having fun in the classroom. And I know many of us, including myself, we miss being in the physical, classroom. Right now, everybody is doing online classes, struggling to learn the new techniques, being up to date with the apps. So this was a good time when we were actually in the place. Now we have to adjust everything and still make it entertaining for our students. So the importance of making the games in the classroom is the effective filter by Krashen. In 1981, he mentioned that this filter is basically, when we lower it, the reduction of anxiety and the negative emotion is amazing. I mean, this is something that helps our student to have a better reception and comprehensible input based on what we're teaching them. So what this means is that if our students, especially right now online, if they log in and they're in class, but they don't want to share their video, or they don't want to participate as much, either speaking or just in the chat, this might be because they're struggling with, family issues maybe, or they feel overwhelmed because of all of the assignments they have to do and be submitting. So our job is to basically find a way of making them feel welcome, first of all, in class, and also making them feel comfortable. Like, instead of feeling nervous and tense and I don't know what this teacher is going to tell me to do, do a fun game to make them feel, relaxed and calmed and just, ready to learn. And once that effective filter is lowered, they're ready to learn. So this is something we have to keep in mind, which is very, very important. Before we see these 4 online classroom games for adults and kids, I want to mention that something that I've learned in the last 5 years in DC is the attention getter. Now, my first years in DC, I remember that I was teaching Spanish, world language Spanish to the kids. And this was pretty interesting because I needed to find a way, based on the way that everything is done in DC, I needed to find a way to get my students' attention after they were doing the game. So they told me about attention getters that everybody was using in school. So the other Spanish teacher was using something that is called ¿Qué pasa, calabaza? So every time she, screamed, ¿Qué pasa, calabaza? Everybody else, all of the kids were supposed to respond, nada, nada, limonada. And then everybody was quiet and they were ready to listen to the next instructions or just to get some feedback of the activity that they were doing. This was a way of creating a better classroom management and also bringing them back into the class without discouraging them to stop speaking, So I started thinking on my own, like, I got to find another attention getter. So I found one that is called paleta de fresa. And every time I would say paleta de fresa, and the students would hear that, or they were like, hey, pay attention. He just said paleta de fresa, and then they would stop talking, and then they would say manos a la cabeza, which is basically, the English version would be hands on top. That means stop, right? Which is what we see here in the picture. So attention getters are very important to control the games that you're about to do. So just a way of keeping in mind, because that way you won't have a mess once the game is over. So we're gonna watch these 4 online classroom games. It's a video by Tasnim Salah, and I hope you enjoy them.
going online now, so are classes. Virtual teaching can be really stressful, so dear fellow teachers, here are 4 top games you can play with your students to make your online classes and your offline ones less stressful and more engaging. I just want to say that I tried all of these activities with my own students. We had a lot of fun, and they're not exclusively for speaking or grammar or vocabulary. You can use them for what is suitable for your class. Let's go. First game is called Here is a Picture. Please, please, please do not take any of these games' names seriously. All you have to do is to spare 5 minutes before class to search for pictures. Let's say you're teaching a grammar lesson about making predictions. After you elicit and explain the future forms, choose some pictures related to your topic, as you can see here, and tell the students, here is a picture, and I want you to make predictions. As I was showing my students the pictures, all students were excited to share their answers, and everyone saw something different. Make sure you choose really fun, crazy photos to grab all students' attention. So here, we're tackling grammar and speaking. Second game is called I Challenge You. For this game, I used the breakout rooms feature, which I think is available in most of the platforms. If you're doing this activity in an actual classroom, so you just divide them in groups. We had a lesson about transportation, so I started the class with telling the students, I challenge you to name as many as you can of means of transportation. I divided them into groups and added them to their breakout rooms. During that time, the students were working as a team, completely focusing on coming up with transportations, and since it was an online class, they took advantage of that and started Googling some transportations. I gave them about 7 minutes and I was blown away with the crazy weird transportations that students found online. Some of them shared pictures and we opened a little discussion on their most and least favorite means of transportation and why. You can use the I Challenge You activity with literally any topic, like I challenge you to write as many sentences as you can using all the English language tenses. I challenge you to name as many fruits as you can. Or you can make it not textbook related and be like, I challenge you to write down all of the students' last names in this class, for example. I mean, you control the level of the difficulty of the challenge depending on your students and your lessons. Third activity is called Find Two Things. This activity is my absolute favorite. Look, in most of our online classes, students sit facing their phones or laptops, and come on, let's put ourselves in their shoes. Sometimes it gets really boring. So this is what I did with one of my classes to get the students out of this mood. I told the students that they have 30 seconds to search around their rooms or living rooms or whatever they actually are and find 2 things or 3 or just 1. Again, you're the boss, you control what suits you the best. So search for 2 things starting with the letter B. So students all at once got up from their chairs and started treasure hunting in the rooms. This can be also super exciting if you are in a classroom, so students can go around the class or their bags. After the 30 seconds were over, my screen was full of bags, brushes, blankets, badges, and one of the students brought her little sister because she said her name is Bono. It was so fun and I kept repeating it with a different letter each time, and I sometimes ask them to talk more about a specific item, like where they get it from, or was it a gift, what is it made of, how long they've been using it, and so on, just to let them practice speaking a little bit. Teachers, I strongly recommend this game. Students felt active the entire time, showed their favorite possessions, shared their memories, laughed out loud, kept their minds busy and engaged. If there was an award for the best online game ever, this would certainly win. Last activity is called Answers Up. This is the easiest activity. All you have to do is prepare some questions. For example, in one of my classes, I wanted to review some new words we took in a previous class. So I asked all of the students to have an empty notebook or cards and a marker pen or any pen. And I told them to fill in the blank, which in this case, on their notebooks or any empty piece of paper they got, but in a heads-up style. For example, the question was, what is another word for wonderful? So all the students started writing the answer, and the first student to hold up the right answer to their forehead gets a point. With larger classes, I tend to give the first 3 students points, to give all of them a chance. It's a fun game not only to revise previous lessons and words, but also to practice spelling. Because if a student misspell a word, I usually give them half the point. I also tried it with a grammar and it went really well. So for example, the questions were like, Donna blank been to Japan, or I blank be a nurse in the future. So you can adjust the type of the questions to what helps your lesson. That's a pretty, as you may have noticed, we teachers love to add fun to our classes, but at the same time, we sometimes are just lazy or not that motivated. So these kind of easy activities would save our classes. And as I mentioned earlier, all of these games can be done in our actual classrooms as well, not only the virtual ones with some little modifications. I know how hard teaching can be, but I want to thank you for always looking for fun ways to make your classes amazing, and thank you for your time.
Okay, so that was the video. It's pretty interesting because I watched a lot of videos and I was just wondering which one can I share about this that can, teachers can actually use right now. Because one thing is so here are these activities that you can do in a classroom, but we're actually not in a physical classroom. So that tends to be the challenge. We have to make things fun, but at the same time, there's got to be like an academic purpose for everything that we're doing, especially because, they're always asking us, our boss, the supervisor is always asking, hey, why did you do this activity? How did it help students? And things like that. So we have to keep that in mind. So we're going to continue with the next part. There it is. Influence of games on students. Now, basically what I was mentioning before, having games will help students feel more comfortable in your class and willing to participate. And once they start participating more, they're actually like indirectly ready to learn. Sometimes they don't know they're learning. They think they're just playing around and they're actually learning. So why games? Games help and encourage many learners to sustain their interest in their work. Games help teachers to create context in which the language is useful and meaningful. So instead of talking about Japan, like in the video we watched, you will talk about another place like Roatan, in Honduras. Encourage the students to take risks and learn about, by trial and error as they experiment the language. So teaching our students that it's okay to make mistakes, they're learning. The more comfortable they get to make mistakes, the more they're going to be speaking and learning in the classroom. So I remember once they asked me, how many games do you play in the classroom? And I told them it all depends, because when I was teaching in El Salvador, our classes over there could be 90 minutes or it could be a whole morning. It all depends when you were teaching. So if the class is like 90 minutes, I would do, depending on the students, I would do 3 games. One at the beginning, one in the middle, and one at the end. These 3 games have to be connected to what is being taught at the time. And there's got to be like a very, there's got to be a big amount of production of the language at the end of the class. And that's where the game comes in. So that's something I would do. If the class was like, if it were to be 45 minutes, like my class is right now here in DC, 45 minutes is a very short time. I would maybe do just 2, one at the beginning, one at the end. But very short activities. That way, they feel comfortable coming in and they leave the classroom very happy as well. Like, hey, this was fun. I didn't feel the class. It went by really fast. So that's one of the key things that we're looking into when we're doing games in classes. So before we do this game, I want to add also that something I've been doing while teaching is, this is my own method, but what I do is I do some research. I look into different types of games that exist. Games that probably are not a common thing to use in the classroom, but I would look into those games and I would try to find a way of combining all of them into one or like a new version and apply it in the classroom, experiment, just to see, if students actually respond in a good way to that class. So, for example, I remember once we did an activity where 5 students were sitting down at their desks with their notebook and a pencil, and then they had a partner. The partner had to go from one end of the classroom to read a few sentences from a paragraph. They would have to go back to where their other partner was sitting down. They would have to dictate everything they just read. And if they couldn't remember what it was, they would have to go back to the book, read another word, another sentence, try to remember it, go back, dictate to their partner. So everybody was actually participating in that case. After a few minutes, they would actually change position. The person that was running around dictating would sit down and start writing, and then the other one that was writing would start, moving around and dictating and reading. So in this case, you're speaking, they're reading, they're writing, they're moving around. So you're basically using all of the skills that need to be taught in the classroom in a fast, productive way for the students. And they're also going to have a lot of fun. So that's just one way of doing it. Now why do I do it this way? Because you could recycle these activities later on. You can adjust it depending on the students, because sometimes there's some students that they don't want to play. They just want to go to class, learn what they need, go home, right? And so that's why you have to adjust games, change them for each class. Don't just leave it the same way. When I say recycle, I mean use the same activity, but keep changing it, learning from it, and applying it, and learn from it. So we have another game here. It's called word building. So the way this game is done, we have the instructions. First, students make groups of 4, right? They pick a writer for the group. They write small words out of the big word that you give them. You give them around 2 minutes for that. So, for instance, if the word is misunderstand, they would have to get together, in this case, breakout rooms, and try to think like, okay, what words can we make with these letters in the word misunderstand? And that's where they start, working together as a team. So some of the words are like under. We have under here, sun, stand right here. We have dad, D-A-D, deer, D-E-A-R. And we have tsunami, T-S-U-N-A-M-I, tsunami. They might come up with other words as well. It all depends on how extensive their vocabulary is. Now, these words, I mean, if they're long, it's good because you give students more opportunities, to write other words. If it's too short, it's going to be more difficult because they won't have enough letters to play around with. Another word is fortunate. I would do the same thing. Just give them, 1 or 2 minutes. It all depends how long your class is. So we have all of these words for the same word, fortunate. You can make all of these words for 12 words that came out of this word. So it's just incredible. You're giving them an opportunity of practicing and thinking of vocabulary they already know. They might even come up with very interesting, new words they can apply. So we have Johnny Bravo there. So after this, I would always ask my students, how do you feel in this game? Why? If they enjoyed it, because every time we're supposed to do this, like every time we teach a class, we're supposed to reflect what went well, what could have gone better. I'm not doing that activity again, so it all depends. You have to keep these things in mind. That way you can, like I said previously, adjust the games and apply it in a different way so you can actually help students reach the objective. I'd like you to think, if you play with your students, why or why not? If you used to play before when we were in a physical classroom, or you don't do it anymore because right now it's not the same. Just curious to know about that from you guys. Also, if you do play, are there any games that you have played before or that you try to avoid? Because some games could be, a little bit competitive with students. This was a question I got a few years back. They asked me, how could we avoid students being too competitive? And I was like, well, instead of telling them, okay, so we're going to have 5 teams in the classroom and the team with the most points is going to win and they're going to earn this candy, whatever prize you have. Instead of picking one specific group out of the 5 or 4 that you have in the whole classroom, I would tell them that as a class, they have one objective, which is, let's see if as a class you guys can get 100 points or 50 points, depending on how many points you're giving. And that way they could work together as one class, as one team. And there wouldn't be any, competition among themselves directly. And you won't have that chaos that could happen. Like, oh no, he's cheating. Oh, she did this. She did it that way. That's not, not valid or whatever. It's not fair. So instead of getting into that kind of issue, just try to find a more of a classroom-related goal. That way, they could, help each other get to the objective of the class. We also have another sentence called guess the sentence. This is the one where I believe could be very competitive. But it's also very fun. So I started doing that with my students. I told them, okay, your goal is as a class, not individually, right? So in this case, in a classroom would be, make groups of 4. Students are going to pick a leader for each group. And then that leader is going to sit back to the screen. So let's say that this is the screen or this is the board. And then in the back, some sentences are going to appear. So if I'm the leader, my classmates are going to explain to me, describe the sentences they see that I can't see, but they would have to use synonyms, antonyms, gestures, sounds, It all depends how loud you want your class to get. And they will have 1 minute, for each sentence. So, for example, I've used this, I found a bag of magic beans. I've also used Spider-Man is eating at McDonald's. It's very interesting to see the gestures they make to describe Spider-Man. Start moving around, and then they start doing this, and they're like, okay, eating, and they're like, no, progressive. Sometimes they go very grammar, like, okay, no, this is the present progressive, but not all the students are like that. And then McDonald's is a very, popular franchise around the world. So I try to find specific words, famous characters, funny action that you could apply in the sentences. Like we have a drunken zombie is walking in Tegucigalpa. So they're like drunken zombies. I'm like, and then he's drunk at the same time. How is that even possible? So that's what makes it fun. And then they would have to they would get up and start walking around the classroom making these weird noises. And then they would have to find a way of describing Tegucigalpa, which is awesome. We have other singers. We have Daddy Yankee is swinging from Mexico to Rattan. How if we have young students, they would know who Daddy Yankee is for sure. I mean, they would start singing his songs or something. But now probably wouldn't be Daddy Yankee. Would be some other singer. I don't know. I'm not that aware right now. Maluma or something like that. I don't know. But if you use singers or actors, for sure it's going to make the whole sentence fun to do. But now I know probably you're thinking, okay, that's awesome, but how do we apply this in a virtual classroom right now? So for the virtual classroom, obviously, it all depends what you're using to teach. It could be, Zoom. We have Google Meet. My son in his class, he's in first grade. They're using Google Meet. In my school, we're using Microsoft Teams. And this is Zoom. But they all share the same thing, which is called breakout rooms, which is awesome because that's where we could do these pair work or group work activities. So I would create the rooms right first. And this is the same activity, but it's like a little bit more of a alternative, different way of doing it. But fun. It's very fun. We have guess the emoji sentence. So the instructions are, create groups of 3 or 4 in different breakout rooms. I think in Microsoft Teams, we call it breakout rooms, but some people call it channels too. It's like basically the same thing that you could do. So in their breakout rooms, they would also, pick the leader of the group. The leader will share her or his screen, like the way I'm doing right now, to his class. And obviously you would have to send the picture to the leader without giving them the sentence, just the picture. So that way, that they're not lying, because if you give them the answer, they're going to be like, everybody, this is the answer. It's going to be obvious. So you got to make it more challenging for them. So you keep the sentence, but you give the leader the emoji sentence. When the leader shares the emoji sentence, the other members will describe the sentence using synonyms, antonyms, gestures, or sounds. It's the same thing, basically. It's just virtual, all right? I picked 1 minute for this. So my example is this. We have 4 emojis, very common. And then students might be thinking, okay, that's a monkey. That's an eye. That's another monkey, but he's sitting down. That's a hand. What can we say with all of this? So the answer would be monkey see, monkey do. They might get it fast, or if they're not that familiar with these phrases in English, they might say something like a monkey is looking, another monkey sitting down saying hi, something like that. So that's what could make the sentence interesting. Another one would be this, 3 pictures. It's raining, right? We have it's raining, cats and dogs. That could be easy for them if they're familiar with the idiom. We have another one with 3. We have a clock, we have a pig, and we have a bird who is flying, right? So when pigs fly, And the last one, we have money, we have an X, a red X, and we have a tree. And it's basically money doesn't grow on trees. So this is a great way of not only having fun, making students think, and making them going back to what they already know and start applying it in the class, but also a way of learning idioms. If you want to focus on phrasal verbs, you can also do it. You can just use the pictures for the students to apply it in class. So that's something I would recommend. You can find this all online. So I hope you have fun with that one too. Let me know how it goes. So I know that after the day, we feel like Johnny Bravo, all messed up and tired. And just like, oh my God, I'm done for the day. Um, always think about how do you feel with the game, how the students feel with the game. Did they like it? Did it go well? All that kind of stuff. What you liked about it, what you didn't, why, and the benefits. What kind of benefits can that kind of game have in your class? So I would say that when students don't feel like they're under the spotlight, they feel more comfortable, more willing to participate in the class. When they start seeing that their other classmates are actually standing up and, explaining and describing, okay, Daddy Yankee is in this place and he's dancing Cumbia Kings, something like that. They start feeling the energy and the vibe and they start participating. And it could be even, the quiet student. So that's something to think about, making them feel very comfortable to participate. Also, students start learning from each other in terms of like strategies. How can I explain somebody eating a hamburger? Probably they're like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. How do I explain hamburger? And then another classmate, his or her, would just go with his hands and be like, oh. And you're like, oh, hamburger, So they learn from each other's strategies. So next time when he has a similar game or the same in another classroom, they're going to know what to do and how to do it. So these are some of the activities, some of the games I have applied, both in the physical classroom and also in the virtual classroom. Nothing is going to be perfect. This is all a matter of, giving your best, experimenting, knowing your students, because the more you know about your students, the more you will know what kind of activities you can bring in the classroom and to apply. Remember that we're moving around our students' needs. Their needs start changing. We start changing our techniques, our methods to help them reach the goal, to help them learn the language. And learning a language can be very tough, but if you have fun doing it, you won't even feel like pressured or tense or stressed. So I finish my presentation with this expression: laugh, and the world laughs with you. Snore, and you sleep alone. And that is my son and his cousin. They're laughing, and he's my motivation. He keeps me happy. He keeps me learning new ways of making him laugh, and I start applying that in my classes. And it's what helps me, move around. So thank you for paying attention today.